Hello, dear students. Welcome you all. I welcome you all on this platform of Sri Jayendra Ranjan classes. Dear students, we have already started with the lecture series of class 12th chapter, that is sexual reproduction in flowering plant. In this, we have already covered two lectures. In this, we have discussed the development, structure, and up to the formation of male gamete in male reproductive organ. Same way in Carmel, we have also discussed the particularly formation of megaspore, the structure of ovule, types of ovule, and in from megaspore the formation of embryo sac, and within embryo sac formation of egg cell. That all we have discussed. Now, dear students, we have already understood the detailing of the male reproductive organ and female reproductive organ. How male gamete is produced, how female gamete is produced. But female gamete is present within the ovary, within the ovule, in the carpel, and pollen grain are produced within the anther. So there is a need to brought them together. Then only then further life cycle can continue. So dear students, to carry out that, we will be discussing one of the important topic of this chapter, that is pollination. Okay, which topic we are going to discuss? Pollination. And if we describe this pollination is a transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma. It is a transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma. And this anther to the stigma transfer can be within the same plant, can be between the different plants. And based on there are different types that we will discuss in this lecture. So first point, you can see the different features, different flowers, different fruits are forming. And if pollination does not occur, this is not possible because this fruits or this flowers will develop from seed, and for formation of seed, there is a need of fusion of male and female gamete. So, in a flowering plant, male and female gamete are produced in the pollen grain and embryo sac respectively. So, there is a need to brought them together. And to brought them together, the pollination will happen. Dear students, you can see in this diagram clearly that this is the particularly pollen grain and this is a particularly pollen tube. Here they have a particularly this sperm cells, and here this is the embryo sac, and in this you will find here a presence of egg cell. These are present into separate parts of the flower. So one is produced in a pollen grain, another one is produced in embryo sac. There is a need to brought them together. Then and then only further processes can occur. But before that, there is a need of pollen grain movement. Now, why these pollen grains are required? So, in these gametes are non-motile. Dear students, we remember in angiosperm, in a flowering plant, whatever the flowering plant, male and female gametes are non-motile. And to brought them together, the pollination will occur, and you can see after pollination, this pollen tube will develop. Here, dear students, you can see here specifically here this pollen tube is developing. So for development of pollen tube, this is the stigma, and this is the particular pollen grain which are received from the stigma, from the anther. Okay, so let's talk further. So pollination is a mechanism, as we have discussed. It is a mechanism to achieve this objective, where the transfer of pollen grain to the stigma of the stem is called pollination. You can see in this diagram as well as here. This is the particular stigma. This is stigma. The pollen grain of this particular are going to land on the stigma of another flower. that can occur within the flower as well. It is showing the cross pollination. So in cross pollination, they have shown different flowers. Now, this pollination is of three types depending on the source of pollen. From where this pollen grain are obtained, from the same plant or the different plant, this pollination is of three types. Or a different flower of the same plant. In this first type we are going to study, and that is autogamy. Now what is autogamy? Auto, the name itself suggests it is a gamy, means it is a pollination here occurring. Auto means within a flower. Okay. So if we define this, it is written that if the pollen grains are transferred from anther to the stigma of the same flower, dear students, please focus here. They are talking about what? Same flower. So if the transfer of pollen occur within the same flower, then this process is known as self-pollination, or it is autogamy. Means one flower is there, it has a anther, it has a stigma, the pollen grain transfer from anther to the stigma, that is simply defined as autogamy. And you can see in this diagram as well as the same is shown. You can see this is the particularly ovules, this is the stigma, and these are the anthers. So from the anthers of the same plant, this particularly pollen grain has transferred to the stigma of the same flower. So because of this, it is known as self-pollination, or it is known as autogamy. Now, the second type is zetynogamy. And zetynogamy, see, autogamy was within the flower. Zetynogamy is in the same plant, okay, but of two different flowers. So you can see the definition, you can understand that pollination, the zetynogamy is described as a pollination taking place between the two flowers. See, two flowers, okay, and two flowers of the same plant. Which plant? Same plant. It means genetically it is a self pollination, but ecologically or functionally, if see, we get cross pollination. Why ecologically or functionally? Because two different flowers are involved. From different flower, the and pollen grain are transferred to the stigma of another flower. So it is a ecologically or functionally it is a cross pollination. But if we talk about genetics of the pollen grain or and a particularly stigma of the two different flower of same plant is same. So because of this, genetically it is considered as a self pollination. So it is between the flowers of the same plant. Now if we talk about the example in zetynogamy, it can occur in case of the maize. As you can see, cross pollination is shown here. Dear students, see, this is the particularly, we can say this is the flower. It's sending its pollen grain to the another flower, okay, of the same plant. See, from here it's showing to the another plant. It is a cross pollination to the different plant, but here within the same plant, different flower, so it is a zetynogamy. If it is within the same flower, then it is autogamy. If it is between the two different flowers of the same plant, it is zetynogamy. And if it is between the two different flowers of different plant, then it is cross pollination. Okay, so I hope now you understood this properly. Here you can see this is a diagram of maize. There also you can see like this condition is observed. Then next is xenogamy. Dear students, after discussing autogamy and zetynogamy, we talk about the xenogamy. Xenogamy is actually defining a cross-pollination. So it occurs when a pollen grain are transferred from anther to the stigma of flower of another plant. So what we have to focus here? Flower of another plant of same species is called as xenogamy. Okay. So it is a type of cross-pollination, both genetically and ecology, because two different flowers are involved. So there should be a need of an agent to carry the pollen grain to the flower of another plant. So it is a xenogamy, and genetically also they are two different plants. So you can see here, this is the agent. You can see this is the agent. This agent can be anything in case of cross pollination. It can be wind, it can be water, it can be insects, it can be animals. Okay, so it is a one flower of different plant, it is a second flower of different plant, and the pollen grain are transferred, then it is a cross pollination of xenogamy. Now, so we have discussed the types. Okay, now after studying type, there are some adaptation, there are some controversies evolved in a particular nature in which some favor the self-pollination, that is autogamy or gynogamy, and some favor the cross-pollination. Okay. So we will discuss which factors, which characteristic, which type of adaptation shows a self-pollination, promote the self-pollination, favor self-pollination, and which discourage the self-pollination and encourage the cross-pollination, that we have to study. First, we will talk about the inbreeding depression. First, we are going to talk about inbreeding depression or inbreeding devices. Sorry, inbreeding devices. These inbreeding devices favor the self-pollination and discourage the cross-pollination. So, if we talk about them in detail, we come to know that the contrivances or adaptation of self-pollination, which are going to encourage the self-pollination, in this first is the bisexuality. First is bisexuality. Dear students, bisexuality means both male and female sex organ are found in one plant. But here we are going to talk about a term with the bisexuality of flower. Means there are two type of flower. One is unisexual, one is bisexual. If it is a unisexual, it has a either carpel or either stamen. But if it is bisexual, it has a both stamen and carpel. So if this is a bisexual, it is known as hermaphrodite, and here a transfer of pollen grain occurs from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. So means it promotes a self-pollination. So bisexuality favors self-pollination. Another one is homogamy. Dear students, in homogamy what happens? Anther and stigma of the bisexual flower, if it is bisexual flower. But anther and stigma of some plants mature at a same time. If they mature at a different time, then if pollen grain are released before the maturation of the stigma, then self-pollination will not occur. But if both stigma and anther mature at the same time, the pollen grain released from the anther will be received by the stigma of the same flower. So this is known as homogamy, maturation at same time. So they brought close to each other by a growth. Sometimes what happens? The means, if suppose carpel is there, like this, and here we find a particular anther. So if anther is by bending brought to near to the stigma, then obviously it will donate its pollen grain here, and self-pollination will be achieved. So same way, by bending, by folding, by growth, they ensure the self-pollination. And examples of homogamy are Mirabilis jalapa, okay, which is a 4 o'clock plant, then Catharanthus, that is vinca, potato, sunflower, wheat, and rice. Okay. These all are going to promote the monogamy or self-pollination. Next to that, next to that, dear students, we are going to talk about some plants such as viola, common pansy, oxalis, and commelina, in which we will study they produce two different types of flower. And in the two different type of flower, we will study the chesmogamous and Christogamous flower. Now you have to remember the examples of this chesmogamous flower and Christogamous flower. They have both type. We remember the examples are which one? Viola, it is NCRT example, so you should remember. They all have a two type of flower. First type of flower is chesmogamous. Chesmo means open. They are known as open flowers. So these flowers are open and are similar to the flower of other species with exposed anthers and stigma. Okay, so they are open flowers means their anther and stigma are exposed. Okay, like this. Whereas another type of flower which are found known as Christogamous flower. It is another second type of flower which are found in Commelina, Viola, okay, and Oxalis. And these flowers do not open at all. They are a closed flowers. Simply we call them, they are the closed flowers. And in these flowers, the anther and stigma lie close to each other. So if there is a closed flower, they are not exposed properly. So whenever it is a closed condition, so whenever the particular anther will release or dehisce the pollen grain within the floral bud, pollen grain directly reach to the stigma to effect pollination. So thus clistogamous flowers are invariably autogamous. Okay, invariably autogamous as there is no chance of cross pollen landing on the stigma because it is obviously closed. So if the flower or particularly flower is completely closed, then obviously there is no chance of any pollen grain come and fertilize the internal stigma. There is no chance of fertilizing internal by the external pollen grain. Okay. So cleistogamy flowers produce assured seed set even in absence of pollinator. Means this is the one of the important example of self-pollination. Okay, so these two types of flower are found in oxalis, okay, commelina, and all these examples. See, in breeding depression, in breeding devices, okay, one more thing we can write, that is a bud pollination. If the pollination occurs within the bud, that is a clistogamous, same clistogamous, similar to the clistogamous, then that also ensures the self pollination. But there is the advantage which we consider with the self pollination is that there is no need of external agents for the pollination. And the second thing, the whatever the ancestor character they have, they remain continue. The genetics of that particular species can continue. And okay, so that is the advantage. But what is the disadvantage? Variation will not occur in this particular type of plants which show self pollination. And if variation not evolved, if variation cannot be observed, they are not going to evolve further and they are not going to adapt with the changing environmental condition. So at some period of time that it may occur that these species are not in equilibrium with the environment and they get lost or they get extincted. So variation cannot be introduced by the self-pollination. So due to this self-pollination or inbreeding, the variation is not introduced and it is known as inbreeding depression. What it is known as inbreeding depression. Okay, now let's talk about the reproduction in plants for the outbreeding devices. Now, outbreeding devices are those devices which encourage cross-pollination and discourage self-pollination. As the name suggests itself, out. means to the another, means of breeding with the another one, breeding with the another flower of the different plant. Then it is outbreeding devices which encourage cross pollination but and discourage self pollination. So if we talk about the characteristic of that, it is known that the majority of the flowering plants produce hermaphrodites, bisexual flowers, and pollen grains are likely to come in contact with the stigma of the self-pollen flower. And self-pollination will occur majorly. And this continued self-pollination result in inbreeding variation means no depression. But some devices are that which promote cross-pollination, and the first one is the dichogamy. Dichogamy is the particular adaptation in which stigma and carpel particularly mature at a different time. At a different time. Yes or no? See, this is a dichogamy. Okay. So flowering plants are developed many devices or adaptation or contrivances, discourage self-pollination and encourage cross-pollination. Okay. Now, in some species, pollen release and stigma receptivity are not synchronized. So, if the stigma mature first, then pollen grain will not particularly attach with the stigma. And if anther mature first, the pollen grain get vested. So, if the particularly pollen release and stigma receptivity is synchronized, then self pollination will occur. And if it is not synchronized, the self pollination will not occur. So, in cross pollination in dichogamy, the same happens, these are not synchronized. So, what happens in case either the pollen is released before the stigma become receptive, and that is known as protentry, okay, or protentous condition. So this is the protentry. Pro means first, entry means entrance, means pollen androecium. Androecium means pollen grain are released from the androecium. So protentry means pollen are released before the stigma receptivity. So this pollen will not particularly pollinate with the same carpel of the same flower, they will pollinate with the another one. So the example is of protentary is sunflower. But if stigma becomes receptive much before the release of pollen, that is known as protogyne. So it will accept the pollen grain of the different plant, then it is a protentary. So Datura and Solanum are known to show protentous condition. Okay, so pro means first, entrus means what? Androecium pollen grain are released first, and protogyne means stigma receptive first. So you can see the particularly a diagrammatical pictorial diagrams are shown here. You can see here the protentary is shown. The first day of flower is there, anther shading, pollens, stigma closed. Means stigma are not receptive, but this pollen grain are able to release the. On the second day, stigma open, but pollen already shaded. So before the stigma open, the pollen grain are released. So it is a protentary. Whereas protogyne, first day of flower, stigma is receptive. On second day of flower, anther days. So before the anther days, this stigma has received the particular pollens of the different flower. Okay, so this is the thing in the dichogamy. Next, we are going to talk about another outbreeding device, that is hercogamy. Which one? Hercogamy. When we talk about hercogamy, dear student, we come to know that in some other species, the anther and stigma are placed in different position so that the pollen cannot come in contact with the stigma of the same flower. Means it is a physical barrier, we can say one type of physical barrier is established between the anther and stigma by a different position of the both stigma and anther, and it is known as hercogamy. And this hercogamy is found in hibiscus and gloriosa. So here you can see this is the thing. Okay, see. Here this is the stigma and this is the pollen, this is the anther. So these are at the below position. So it is not possible that the pollen reach to this position. Okay. So both these devices prevent autogamy and promote a cross pollination. Next to that, we are going to talk about heterostyly. In heterostyly, we come to know that it is a third device to prevent inbreeding in the different heights of the styles of the flowers of the same species. It is heterostyly means whatever the flowers in the same species are found, they have a different length of their style. So because of this, it is known as heterostyle. Okay. And example, if we talk, the heterostyle is found in case of specifically, we can say Alden, Landia, Primula, and Mosaic. You remember these two examples are important. That is Primula and Oxalis. And you can see diagrammatically the particular three types are shown here. Let's see. Here, particularly, these are the top position, these are the lower position. Okay, such a way the particularly these are the anthers. So before some compatibility, we have to draw this in detail. Now, actually, in heterostyly, two things occur. In heterostyly, two things occur. So here, heterostyly is of two types. Distyly and tristyly. Now, distyly means presence of two types of particular flower. I am drawing this here. Suppose this is the carpel, and here the anthers are present in lower position. But another type of flower which are possible. So what will happen? The pollen grain which are released by this anther going to fertilize or attach with the stigma of another flower like this, and the pollen grain from here will reach to this one. So if this particularly two types of flower are found, one is this one, that is long styled, and these are short styled. But in tri-style, you will find the presence of three types of flower. Okay, and if you talk about these three types of flower, how they are going to pollinate, that we have to discuss. So these three types of flower can be found. In the first type of flower, you can see the particularly style is longest. In the second style is of medium sized, and third style is shortest. Now whatever, if the particularly they have a longest particular style, then these are going to pollinate here. These are also going to pollinate here. These are also going to pollinate here. These are also going to pollinate here. But if this is a medium size, this pollen grain will pollinate here. This are going to pollinate here. And this is the medium lowest size, so this pollinate here. So like this, the particular pollination can occur. So it is of different three types of flower can be present. So it is known as rice type. After this outbreeding device, next outbreeding device which we are going to discuss, that is self-incompatibility. So till now, how many devices we have discussed? One is dichogamy, one is hercogamy, another one is the particularly we can say heterostyling, and next we are going to talk about the self-incompatibility. Self-incompatibility is the synonym for the self-sterility. So it is a fourth device, and it prevents inbreeding, and it is a self-sterility or self-incompatibility. Now in this, what happens? The rejection of self-pollen occur. If the pollen grain of same genotype is interact with the stigma, it is not going to receive it and reject the pollen tube development of the pollen grain of the same flower. So it is known as self-incompatibility or self-sterility. Now if we want to discuss this with the example, this self-incompatibility is known as example of multiple allele. So how that we will discuss. Specific type of gene which is found known as S gene, and S gene has a several array like S1, S2, S3, S4 and so on. Now what happens if this is a carpel and the genotype of this plant is S1, S2, means every cell has a S1, S2 genotype, and it has a particularly anther. So now anther are haploid. So if they produce a pollen grain, they either produce pollen grain of S1 or S2. Now if S1 reach to the stigma, it will not allow development of pollen tube of S1 type of pollen grain and not of S2 type of pollen grain. But if some other flower is there and that has particularly S3, S4 genotype, if its pollen grain which are released that are of S3 and S4 type, if this pollen grain come and interact with the particular this pollen tube, it will allow a pollen tube development of this genotype pollen grain. So this is showing the rejection of the pollen grain having the same genotype or identical genotype to the carpel, means the pollen grain of the same flower are rejected in the self-incompatibility or self-sterility. Okay. Next to that, another one more outbreeding device is remaining, that is a dicline. Dear students, this dicline, the another name which is used for this dicline is nothing but it is unisexuality. And this unisexuality term is used for the dicline. Now, if we talk, this is a genetic mechanism which prevent self-pollination from the fertilized the ovule by inhibiting the pollen germination or pollen tube growth in the pistil. And if these are the unisexual flower, then the flower has either stigma or carpel. So there is a no chance of self-pollination and cross-pollination will be prevented. So if both male flowers are present on the same plants such as castor and cucurbits, see. Now what happens? Unisexual flowers have two conditions. Unisexual latigo diacotyledonous have two conditions. Either there is a monoecious or either they can be dioecious. Now monoecious means what? Both the male sex organ and female sex male flower and female flower. Mean unisexuality means what? Male flower is different, female flower is different. The male flower has only stamen, carpel is not there. Female flower has only carpel, stamen is not there. So if these two types of flower, unisexual flower, are present in the same plant, it is a monoecious condition. Suppose this is a plant, and this is a one male flower, and this is a one female flower, and this is having a female flower. Then it is monoecious. But in dioecious, the male plant is different, female plant is different. Male plant has a male flower, and female plant has a female flower. Then this type of condition is known as dioecious. Now here, the monoecious examples are castor, cucurbits, and maize. And in castor, cucurbits, and maize, both male and female flowers are present on the same plant. So they can prevent autogamy because they are not present within the same flower, but they are present on the different flowers of the same plant, but so they cannot prevent geitonogamy. So this monoecious condition, geitonogamy, cannot be prevented, and it is one of the important statement with respect to question. Apart from that, we have a dioecious condition. So in dioecious condition, you can see male and female flowers are present on the different plant. So there is a no chance of autogamy, there is a no chance of geitonogamy. So it is a totally dioecious condition, and this dioecious condition prevent both autogamy and geitonogamy. Okay, so till now we have discussed already the particular what is pollination, types of pollination, and the inbreeding devices and outbreeding devices in detail. Now after this, we are going to deal about that if cross pollination is occurring or if geitonogamy is occurring, there is a need of sometimes agents which carry the pollen grain from one flower to the another flower. And these agents are of different type. So we are going to discuss these agents of cross-pollination. These agents can be biotic or abiotic. Either it can be animals or it can be wind or water. If they are the animals, that is a biotic agent. If they are wind or water, natural, they are a abiotic agent. But the most common is which one? Use of biotic agent. So majority plant use this biotic agent as for pollination. Now you can see this is one important interesting diagram which is showing that this particular bird is taking a particular pollen grain and it will give to the another flower. Same way, they are also particularly present on the flowers. So their antenna or their eggs will capture the pollen grain and will be given to the another flower. So if you talk about agents of cross-pollination in detail, you will find this many types of different pollinating agents will be occur. In abiotic factor or abiotic agent are wind and water, and biotic factor are bird, insect, and bite. Several other biotic factors are also there. Now, in this, the separate different technical terms are given for the use of different pollinating agent. So if you talk about wind, for wind the term is used that is anemophily, means pollination by wind. Water, hydrophily, pollination by water. Bird, ornithophily by birds. Insect, zoophily, entomophily, sorry, by insects. Chiropterophily by bats. So this type of terms are used and we will discuss that terms in detail in this part. Okay, students. So I hope you are getting this part. That how the male reproductive organ is framed. We have discussed in the previous lectures. How male reproductive are particularly framed. How egg is produced. How male gamete is produced. How the particularly they are coming in contact with the pollination and the different types of pollination we have discussed. Now after this, we will be discussing this pollinating agent in detail. So first we will be discussing abiotic agent, and in abiotic agent we are going to talk about first abiotic agent, that is wind, that how wind is playing a role in the transport of pollen grain. And this wind pollination is known as anemophily. Now we have to deal with the characters which are shown by flowers which show anemophily. Okay. So it is a pollination by wind. As you know, all it is a pollination by wind. In this, several characteristics are found in case of this anemophilous flower. If you see the pollen grain, these pollen grains are particularly light and non-sticky. Okay, then so they can be easily carried by the wind. They have feathery stigma. They have a numerous flower packed in inflorescence. Okay, and they have a single village ovule. Dear students, we will be discussing this point in detail. You can see here in a particular pictorial diagram, several pollen grains are released at a one time. Okay. So now, if you talk about the characteristic one by one in detail, I have to make you understand what characteristic they have. So if you talk about anemophilous flower, then you will see the characteristic of flower. If we talk, first characteristic is the flowers are small. Flowers are small and inconspicuous. Inconspicuous means they are not clearly visible. Apart to that, in these flowers, what happens? The non-essential parts like sepals and petals shed or get reduced. The flowers which are showing the anemophily, in these flowers, the flowers are colorless, okay, odorless or nectarless. Because if any living organism is involved, if any living organism is involved, then there is a need to sense a color, odor, or nectar. But this is a non-living, this is a wind. So wind cannot recognize the color, odor, or nectar. So this type of flowers are usually pollinated by the wind. Then in this, male flowers are more abundant. Male flowers are more abundant. Okay. Then if it is a bisexual flower, then also stamens are more numerous. If it is a unisexual flower, then there is a what? Male flowers are more abundant. Then both stigma and anthers are exerted. Exerted. Exerted means they are actually protruded towards the outside. They are not bended towards the center. They are bended towards the outside. So they are known as exerted. Okay. They have versatile anthers. Now versatile anthers they have means the filament is attached to the back of this particularly pollen grain. Okay. And if this is the back side, okay, where this filament is attached. And this is the anther. If filament is attached at the back, an anther can swing freely. Then this condition is known as versatile anther. Next to that, there are some examples like Urtica, one plant is there. In this you will find this anthers burst suddenly and throw a pollen grain. Anther burst suddenly and release or throw the pollen grain, and this mechanism is known as gunpowder mechanism. Okay, so that you should remember. In this, pollen grain are light, small, dusty. Okay, and it is known that these are so light that they can be blown away up to the distance of 1300 kilometers. Okay, they are dry. They can be what? Dry. Now, this anemophily is, or wind pollination, if we consider, it is highly wasteful. Why it is highly wasteful? Because it is a non-directional first that pollen grain reach to in any direction, and large number of pollen grains are produced. So it is not possible that all pollen grain reach to the particular determined stigma. So due to highly wasteful and they have a non-directional nature. Okay. Then if we talk about next characteristic, they have figure stigma. Now the question is, what do you mean by feathery stigma? Feathery stigma means hairy, branched stigma. If stigma is hairy and branched, then it can trap or catch the wind-borne pollen grain. Means whatever the pollen grain are moving in the wind, they can be particularly trapped or catched by the feathery stigma. Okay, and here large number of pollen grains are produced. If we go in detail some characteristic, wind pollinated flowers usually often have a single ovule in each ovule. In each ovule you will find a single ovule, so uniovulated. And if there are a large number of flowers, they form an inflorescence. Okay, so this is the thing with respect to particularly wind pollinated flowers. If we talk about the examples which show wind pollination, then if we talk about some of the examples of the plant, then they are date palm, then cannabis, coconut, then grasses. These are the examples which show anemophily. And this is the common question you can see in the particularly this one. You can write maize as an example also. Okay. So this is all about anemophily, and I hope you understood anemophily.